September 22nd, 1692. 8 bodies swing from a locust tree on Proctor's Ledge. The rope creaks. A crowd of farmers and ministers stands in the brown grass below, watching in silence as Reverend Nicholas Noyes turns to the corpses and declares, "What a sad thing it is to see 8 firebrands of hell hanging there." No one disagrees. No one dares. 3 days earlier, in a field beside the Salem jail, an 81-year-old farmer named Giles Corey was stripped naked and pressed beneath a wooden board piled with stones. When asked to confess, he spoke only 2 words: "More weight." When Sheriff George Corwin stood on the stones himself, Corey's tongue was pushed out of his mouth. The sheriff used his cane to force it back in. This is not a story about witches. There were no witches in Salem. This is a story about what happens when neighbors stop trusting neighbors, when children become judges, when fear becomes the only law. This is Salem, 1692, and the devil is everywhere. In January of 1692, Salem Village smelled of wood smoke, livestock, and frozen mud. The cold that winter was vicious. Historical records describe it as one of the harshest seasons in memory, the kind of cold that kills pigs in their pens and cracks the bark of apple trees. The North River ran sluggish and gray. Frost clung to the windows of the parsonage on Center Street like white fungus. The village was small, perhaps 550 souls spread across rocky farmland and tidal marshes. Ipswich Road divided the community in half, a muddy wound separating the poor farmers of Salem Village from the wealthy merchants of Salem Town. Jealousy festered along that road. Property disputes, unpaid debts, grazing rights. The villagers were known throughout Essex County as quarrelsome. They had already driven out 2 ministers by refusing to pay their salaries. Every Sunday, families walked through the snow to the cold meetinghouse to hear Reverend Samuel Parris deliver 3-hour sermons about Satan's nearness. Parris was a bitter man, a failed merchant from Barbados who had come to the cloth as a second career. He spoke of the devil the way other men spoke of weather, as an observable, daily presence. The congregation sat on hard wooden pews, their breath fogging in the unheated air, and listened. In the parsonage, life was strict. Parris's household included his wife Elizabeth, his 10-year-old son Thomas, and 2 young girls, his daughter Betty, age 9, and his niece Abigail Williams, age 11. There was also Tituba, an enslaved woman from South America, likely from an Arawak community in present-day Venezuela, whom Parris had brought north from Barbados. She cooked, she cleaned, she watched the children. The days were short, the nights were long. The girls had nothing to do. Somewhere in those dark winter evenings, Betty and Abigail began to play a game. They cracked an egg into a glass of water and watched the albumin spread. A folk practice called a Venus glass. The shape it formed was supposed to reveal the face of a future husband. Harmless fortune-telling. A way to pass time. One night, one of the girls saw something in the water that was not a man's face. She saw a coffin. She screamed. And she did not stop. The fits began sometime in mid-January. Betty Parris stopped speaking mid-sentence. She stared at walls. She crouched beneath furniture and barked like a dog. She threw a Bible across the room. Her father tried prayer. When prayer failed, he tried fasting. When fasting failed, he called Dr. William Griggs. Griggs was an older man, uncle to 17-year-old Elizabeth Hubbard, one of the village's domestic servants. He examined the girls carefully. He could find no fever, no rash, no swelling. Betty and Abigail writhed on the floor, screamed in voices that sounded nothing like their own. and complained of invisible pins stabbing their flesh. The doctor had no medical explanation, so he offered a supernatural one. "The evil hand," he said, "is upon them." Bewitchment. The word spread through Salem Village like fire through dry timber. By February, the fits had spread. Ann Putnam Jr., 12, began having identical symptoms. Then Mercy Lewis, 17. Then Elizabeth Hubbard herself. The girls gathered in the parsonage and writhed together, a chorus of screaming children accusing invisible tormentors of pinching, biting, strangling. On February 25th, a neighbor named Mary Sibley made a decision that would destroy the village. She instructed Tituba to bake a witch cake, a small loaf made from rye meal and the urine of the afflicted girls. The cake was fed to the family dog. In folk tradition, this was counter-magic. It was supposed to reveal the witch's identity. It didn't work, but it did make the girls name names. Under pressure from magistrates, Jonathan Corwin and John Hathorne, the children pointed their fingers. Tituba, Sarah Good, a homeless beggar who wandered from house to house. Sarah Osborne, a bedridden old woman who hadn't attended church in months. On February 29, 1692, warrants were issued. The next morning, the first of the accused stood in Ingersoll's tavern before a crowd of curious farmers. The magistrates asked Sarah Good if she had made a pact with the devil. She denied it. They asked Sarah Osborne. She denied it. Then they asked Tituba. She did not deny it. "The devil came to me," she said, "and bid me serve him." She described a tall man with white hair, black dogs, red cats, yellow birds. She said there were other witches, many of them, a conspiracy. She named names. The room went silent. And then everyone started screaming. By June, the jails were overflowing. The Salem jail was a wooden building on Prison Lane, 20 feet square, 2 stories tall. It had a dirt floor, iron bars on the windows, no ventilation. It stank of tobacco, human waste, and rotting straw. Lice crawled in the seams of every garment. The prisoners were shackled to the walls with iron cuffs. This was believed to prevent their specters from escaping to torment the afflicted. The accused paid for their own chains. They paid for their own food. 2 shillings 6 pence a week, charged to families who often could not afford it. Among the prisoners was 4-year-old Dorothy Good, daughter of Sarah. She had been arrested on March 23rd on suspicion of witchcraft. Someone fashioned tiny shackles for her wrists. She remained in that darkness for 8 months. When she was finally released, her father later wrote, "She had little or no reason to govern herself." She never recovered. The Court of Oyer and Terminer, to hear and determine, convened on June 2nd. Governor William Phipps had created it specifically to handle the witchcraft cases. The judges were prominent men, merchants, magistrates. None had formal legal training. They accepted spectral evidence, testimony about dreams and visions. If a girl claimed to see a specter flying through the sky, that was proof enough. Bridget Bishop was the first to hang on June 10th. 5 more followed in July. 5 more in August. By September, the execution days had become routine. The condemned were loaded into ox carts and driven down Essex Street while crowds watched. At Proctor's Ledge, a rocky outcrop at the base of Gallows Hill, they were hanged from tree branches and left to swing. On September 19th, Giles Corey refused to enter a plea. He was 81 years old. His wife, Martha, had already been convicted. Corey knew that if he stood trial, the court would seize his estate. His children would inherit nothing. So he said nothing. Not guilty. Not innocent. Nothing. The law's remedy for silence was called peine forte et dure, strong and hard punishment. Sheriff George Corwin stripped Corey naked in a field beside the jail and laid him on his back. A board was placed on his chest. Then stones, one by one. Between each stone, Corey was asked to plead. He refused. More weight. More stones. More weight. For 2 days this continued. Robert Califf, a witness, later wrote that Corey's tongue was pressed out of his mouth. The sheriff used his cane to shove it back in. On the third day, around noon, Giles Corey died. 3 days later, his wife Martha was hanged with 7 others. October came with cold rain. The jail still held over 100 accused witches, but something had changed. The afflicted girls had overreached. They accused the wife of Governor Phipps. They accused the president of Harvard. Suddenly, the people with power to stop the trials had reason to stop them. On October 3rd, Increase Mather, one of the most respected ministers in the colony, published a treatise arguing against spectral evidence. It were better, he wrote, that 10 suspected witches should escape than that one innocent person should be condemned. On October 29th, Governor Phipps dissolved the Court of Oyer and Terminer. When the new Superior Court of Judicature convened in January 1693, it refused to accept spectral evidence. Of 56 defendants, only 3 were convicted. Phipps pardoned them all. By May 1693, every accused witch in Massachusetts had been released. The silence that followed was worse than the screaming. 20 people were dead, 19 hanged, 1 pressed. At least 5 more had died in jail. From cold, from disease, from despair. Over 200 had been accused. Families had been destroyed. Reputations had been obliterated. The dead could not be buried in consecrated ground. Their bodies were dumped in shallow crevices on Proctor's Ledge, where families returned at night to secretly retrieve them. In 1697, the Massachusetts General Court declared a day of fasting and repentance. Judge Samuel Sewell stood in his church pew while the minister read aloud his confession. He had sinned. He had condemned innocent people. He begged forgiveness from God and man. He would observe a day of fasting every year for the rest of his life. Ann Putnam, Jr., one of the chief accusers, made a public apology in 1706. She claimed she had been deluded by Satan. She expressed sorrow for accusing innocent blood. She died unmarried at 37, the last of her immediate family. Reverend Samuel Parris was driven from Salem Village in 1697. He never recovered his reputation. His daughter Betty, the first afflicted girl, married a shoemaker and never spoke publicly about the trials. She died in 1760, at 77. She carried whatever she knew to her grave. Abigail Williams vanished from the historical record around 1696. We do not know what happened to her. We do not know if she lived. We do not know if she ever regretted the names she screamed in that cold parsonage in January 1692. We know only what Salem became. A word. A warning. A place where, for one terrible year, children decided who would live and who would die. The village is gone now, absorbed into a town called Danvers. The parsonage was torn down. The jail was demolished. The locust trees on Proctor's Ledge are long dead. But if you stand on that rocky slope today, behind a Walgreens parking lot, next to a residential street, you can still feel something. Not the devil. Something worse. The memory of what ordinary people will do when they become afraid.